From the very first day, Jordan believed hard work could conquer anything. Every morning, he woke before the sun, ironed his only good shirt, and caught the 1600 a.m. train into the city. The ride was long, the pay modest, but the dream was enormous. To rise through the ranks and prove that someone like him could succeed in a world that didn't always make space for people who looked like him. The company was everything Jordan had hoped for. Polished glass walls, high ceilings, and a mission statement that promised equality, innovation, and opportunity. He had read it on their website 100 times before landing the interview. When they offered him the job as a sales associate, he couldn't stop smiling. It felt like all the sacrifices, his late mother's encouragement, the nights spent studying instead of sleeping, had finally paid off. At first, things seemed fine. Jordan showed up early, stayed late, and hit every target his team set. He handled the toughest clients with calm professionalism. But then came Mr. Walker, the new manager. He was tall, sharp-suited, with a smile that never reached his eyes. Everyone called him the fixer, the man sent in to tighten up teams, to cut inefficiencies. Jordan wanted to believe in him. But it didn't take long before the air changed. Walker's tone toward Jordan was different from the start, subtle, coated in polite microaggressions. When Jordan shared ideas in meetings, Walker brushed them aside only to repeat them later as his own. When clients praised Jordan, Walker redirected credit to the team. Small slights at first, then bigger ones. Soon, Jordan found himself excluded from key projects. His name disappeared from email chains. Walker began calling him Kid, even though Jordan was nearly 30. Then came the so-called performance check-ins, short meetings that felt more like interrogations. Walker always framed his criticism carefully, never quite enough to be openly racist, but enough to leave Jordan feeling the sting. "You're just not quite fitting in with our culture," Walker would say. "You seem overly sensitive when given feedback." Jordan knew what that meant. Culture didn't refer to company policies. It referred to the unspoken rules about who got to belong, who got to lead, and who was tolerated only as long as they stayed quiet. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday morning. Jordan arrived drenched, holding his soaked umbrella, only to find Walker waiting at his desk. The manager wore that same calculated smile, but his tone was colder than ever. He said there had been complaints. Unspecified, of course. Something about attitude and team disruption. Jordan's stomach dropped. He knew the routine. These were the same vague reasons often used to remove people like him without leaving a trace of discrimination on paper. Walker didn't even let him finish his defense. Within minutes, Jordan's employee badge was deactivated. Security escorted him out like a criminal. His coworkers avoided eye contact, pretending to be busy. The same people who had once praised his work now couldn't look at him. Outside, the rain poured harder. Jordan stood under the gray sky, clutching a box of his things. A coffee mug, a photo of his mother, a stack of notebooks filled with ideas that would never see daylight. He felt small, humiliated, and powerless. All his efforts, years of loyalty, discipline, and kindness, erased in a moment because someone with power decided he didn't belong. The next few weeks blurred together. Rejection emails piled up. Interviews went nowhere. Bills stacked higher. Each day, Jordan wrestled with the same question: why wasn't my best enough? Then one night, something shifted. Scrolling through his old folders, he found a pitch deck, a presentation he'd once built for the company, filled with data and innovative strategies to grow sales in emerging markets. It was the same plan Walker had dismissed as too risky. Yet, as Jordan studied it again, he realized how solid it really was. How it could work for any company that believed in it. Maybe, he thought, he didn't need their approval anymore. Maybe he could build something of his own. It started small, freelancing for clients online, then partnering with a friend from college who had connections in tech startups. Jordan poured his heart into every project, building a reputation for results. The work was grueling, but every hour fueled his determination. For the first time in months, he started to feel alive again. He still thought about Walker sometimes. The smirk, the condescension, the way he'd ended Jordan's career with a single meeting. But those thoughts no longer stung, they fueled him. They reminded him why he could never let bitterness win. Then one morning, 2 years later, Jordan opened his inbox to find an unexpected message. It was from a major investment firm, a company expanding aggressively into the very market Jordan specialized in. They were looking for a director to lead a new division. The salary was triple anything he'd earned before. The role overseeing multiple corporate partnerships, including one with his old employer, Jordan froze, his old company, the same one that had fired him. And as he scrolled through the attached documents, one name stood out: Regional Sales Manager Edward Walker. Jordan's heart pounded. The man who had humiliated him, the man who told him he'd never fit in, was now going to be under his supervision if he accepted this offer. For a moment, he just sat there in silence, the weight of poetic justice sinking in. Life had come full circle. But was he ready to face the man who'd tried to destroy him? As he stared out the window, the city lights flickering below, a storm of emotions swirled inside him. Anger, fear, satisfaction, and uncertainty. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just a new job. It was a test of everything he'd become. And as he clicked accept on the offer letter, a quiet determination settled over him. The tables were turning. 2 years had passed since Jordan was escorted out of that glass building in the rain. Humiliated, powerless, and forgotten. But time has a strange way of reshaping pain. What once felt like failure had transformed into fuel, and every hardship had become a lesson in resilience. Now, standing before the gleaming skyscraper once again, he wasn't the same man who had left. The city looked familiar, but everything else had changed. His name now carried weight in the corporate world. His firm had made headlines for tripling revenue in international markets, his leadership praised for its vision and inclusivity. Still, walking into the same lobby where his career had once ended stirred something deep inside him, an old ache that hadn't fully healed. The receptionist smiled professionally as she handed him his new access badge. The plastic card felt heavier than it should have, almost poetic in its symbolism. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He was coming back, not as an employee, but as the boss overseeing their regional partnership. The moment the elevator doors opened, Jordan felt the hum of whispered curiosity. Employees glanced up from their desks, their eyes flicking between him and the executive escort guiding him through the office. Some faces looked vaguely familiar, others completely new. But one expression, one set of eyes froze him in place. Edward Walker. He was standing by the conference room, adjusting his tie, the same arrogant composure on his face. The years hadn't been kind to him. His hairline receded slightly, and his confidence seemed forced, but his smirk remained. The smirk Jordan remembered from that day. Walker looked up, expecting to see another senior manager. But when he recognized the face walking toward him, his expression faltered. For the first time, the mask cracked. His confident posture stiffened, his jaw tightening as though he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Jordan didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The meeting began. Executives from both companies gathered around the table, their polished smiles and rehearsed greetings filling the room. Jordan sat at the head, the seat of authority. He listened calmly as department heads gave presentations, including Walker, whose voice trembled slightly under the pressure. Every time Walker tried to speak over him or dismiss his ideas, Jordan simply redirected the conversation with quiet command. No anger, no revenge, just control. The balance of power had shifted completely, and everyone in the room felt it. After the meeting, as people filed out, Walker lingered. He approached Jordan, hesitating at the doorway, searching for words that might ease the discomfort. But Jordan's calm, unreadable expression made him falter. The silence between them carried the weight of their history, a silent reminder of every slight, every insult, every door he had once closed. In the weeks that followed, Jordan's role became more involved. He began reviewing reports, making strategic changes, and holding one-on-one evaluations with managers. Word spread quickly that the new director was tough but fair, a leader who valued effort over ego, results over reputation. Employees who had once been overlooked found themselves recognized. Those from marginalized backgrounds, who had felt invisible under Walker's leadership, began to speak up again. Slowly, the culture of fear and favoritism started to shift. But the more things changed, the more obvious it became that Walker was struggling. His performance slipped. His charm no longer worked. Colleagues who once flattered him now avoided him. He had built his authority on intimidation and image, and both were crumbling. Jordan watched carefully, not with vengeance, but with a quiet, patient understanding. He knew this was karma at work. Still, a part of him wrestled with unease. It would have been easy to humiliate Walker, to fire him the way he'd been fired. But Jordan couldn't bring himself to stoop to that level. He wanted justice, not cruelty, And justice, he believed, sometimes came naturally, through truth, not retaliation. Then came the audit. Jordan had requested a full review of the company's sales records, part of his effort to streamline efficiency and ensure transparency. It was standard procedure. But when the report landed on his desk a few weeks later, his stomach tightened. Several discrepancies appeared under Walker's management: inflated sales numbers, unreported client losses, questionable expense claims. It wasn't just incompetence, it was manipulation. For a long moment, Jordan sat in silence, staring at the papers. This wasn't how he wanted things to go. He had hoped for redemption, maybe even reconciliation. But the truth had a way of surfacing no matter how deeply it was buried. He could have covered it up, handed it to HR quietly, spared Walker public shame. But that wasn't his decision to make anymore. Integrity demanded accountability, the same accountability Walker had denied him years ago. So Jordan forwarded the report to the board. The following week, an emergency meeting was called. Walker was summoned, pale and visibly shaken. The executives laid out the evidence. Clear, undeniable. The man who had once strutted through the office with smug confidence now sat hunched, stammering excuses that sounded hollow in the sterile boardroom. Jordan didn't speak until the very end. When he did, his voice was calm, even compassionate. He didn't attack, didn't gloat. He simply stated facts. That leadership demanded honesty, that no one was above accountability, and that fairness wasn't optional. Walker was terminated immediately. No applause, no satisfaction, just silence. Afterward, Jordan walked out into the same hallway where he had once been escorted out by security. But this time, the air felt lighter. Employees nodded respectfully as he passed. The same walls that had once echoed with humiliation now carried whispers of admiration. Yet, that night, as he stood by his office window overlooking the city, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt reflective. Power hadn't erased the pain of the past. It had simply transformed it into perspective. He had won, yes, but what did victory mean without compassion? He thought of his mother. How she used to tell him that strength wasn't about revenge, but about rising above. The next morning, Jordan sent an email, not to the board, not to the staff, but to Walker. It was short, professional, and kind. He wished him luck, because true justice, Jordan realized, wasn't about seeing others fall. It was about standing tall, even when they didn't deserve it. But just when Jordan thought his story had reached its ending, a new twist emerged. A week later, he received a call from corporate headquarters about a global promotion that would move him even higher. The offer was life-changing, but with it came an unexpected challenge. The promotion would place him over not just this company, but several others, including one owned by a man with a long history of discrimination scandals. And this time, the fight for justice wouldn't be personal, it would be systemic. When Jordan accepted the global promotion, he thought he understood what responsibility meant. He had led teams before, made tough calls, and faced down prejudice head-on, but nothing compared to this. The new position wasn't just a step up, it was an entirely different world. Now, every decision he made rippled across multiple regions, shaping careers, policies, and company culture on a scale he'd never imagined. His name was printed on corporate memos, his face appeared in leadership newsletters, and people who had once dismissed him now spoke his name with respect. But behind the congratulations and polished smiles, Jordan saw something else. The same undercurrent of hypocrisy that had once nearly destroyed him. This new division was a patchwork of old companies merged under one umbrella. On paper, it was a modern, inclusive powerhouse. But beneath the surface lay years of buried bias, favoritism, and exploitation. Some departments were still led by people who thought diversity was a trend rather than a truth. And at the center of it all was a man named Richard Grant, the CEO of one of the largest partner firms. He was old guard corporate to the core, sharp suits, silver hair, and a tone that dripped with entitlement. His company had been quietly accused of racial discrimination for years. Promotions denied, complaints ignored, and diversity hires treated as box-ticking exercises. Jordan's first meeting with him was civil, but tense. Grant congratulated him, smiling tightly, then added, "We're glad to have fresh blood." The board's been pushing for new perspectives. His emphasis on new hung heavy in the air. Jordan had heard that tone before, the same tone Walker once used. That practiced civility masking deep discomfort. But Jordan had learned that silence was its own weapon. He let Grant talk, every polished insult neatly recorded in his mind. Weeks turned into months. Jordan spent long nights reviewing policies, identifying patterns in hiring, pay, and promotions. The numbers didn't lie. Certain employees, particularly those of color, were systematically overlooked. The higher up the ladder you looked, the less diversity you saw. He started making changes, quietly, methodically. He created mentorship programs, equal review processes, and anonymous reporting channels. He didn't announce them with fanfare, he let results speak. Slowly, the old systems began to shift, but resistance came quickly. Senior managers whispered that he was playing identity politics. Others complained that he was favoring minorities. A few even hinted that he was too emotional to lead effectively. The same coded language that had haunted him before. Jordan didn't flinch. Every time someone questioned his authority, he pointed to performance data. His teams were outperforming all others. The proof was undeniable. Still, Richard Grant wasn't pleased. He saw Jordan's reforms as a threat to control, to image, to the old hierarchy that kept men like him on top. Then came the confrontation. It happened during a high-level strategy meeting. Jordan proposed a new initiative requiring all partner firms to disclose diversity metrics publicly. It was a bold move, one that would expose decades of inequity. Grant objected immediately, calling it unnecessary, claiming it would damage the company's reputation. The tension was electric. The room fell silent as Jordan explained why transparency mattered, not for appearances, but for accountability. He spoke calmly, his words measured but heavy with conviction. When the meeting ended, Grant stormed out without a word. Over the next few days, subtle pushback began. Reports delayed, approvals withheld, emails ignored. Jordan recognized the pattern, the same slow suffocation of progress he'd faced under Walker. But this time he had power. He wasn't the victim anymore. He gathered evidence, correspondence, HR data, employee testimonials. He didn't go to war impulsively, he built a case. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. Employees across the organization began reaching out privately. They thanked him for being the first leader who saw them, who listened, who understood. Jordan realized that his fight wasn't just professional. It was personal for everyone who had ever been silenced. Weeks later, the board convened a private session. Grant had filed a formal complaint accusing Jordan of disrupting operations. It was a move of desperation, one last attempt to protect his crumbling empire. But Jordan came prepared. He presented the data, proof of discrimination, retaliation, and manipulation of company reports. Every number, every testimony told the same story. Grant's leadership wasn't about excellence. It was about exclusion. By the time Jordan finished, the boardroom was silent. Grant's face was pale, his confidence fractured. In a unanimous decision, the board not only rejected Grant's complaint, they removed him from his position. The news spread quickly. For the first time in the company's history, leadership was restructured to reflect the diversity of its people. Jordan's reforms were no longer seen as experiments but as the new standard. But success came with a cost. The higher he climbed, the lonelier it became. The corporate world was full of allies in public, but very few in truth. Each victory felt both empowering and isolating. Late one night, sitting in his office surrounded by city lights, Jordan opened a message from an unknown sender. It was short, just a few words. "You may have won this round, but we're not done yet." No signature, no name. Just a chilling reminder that the fight against prejudice didn't end with one man's downfall. Jordan leaned back in his chair, staring out at the skyline. He thought about how far he'd come, from being fired in the rain to sitting at the top of the industry. But now, a new storm was brewing. Someone out there wanted to bring him down. And this time, it wouldn't be through whispers or bias. It would be something bigger, something deliberate. The message haunted Jordan for days. Anonymous threats weren't new in corporate life, especially when change disrupted long-standing power structures. But this one felt different. Calculated, personal, and deliberate. He had been in the game long enough to recognize the tone of someone who wasn't merely angry but dangerous. He kept the message quiet. No press, no public reaction, not even a whisper to his closest colleagues. Instead, he focused on his work, tightening policies, supporting minority initiatives, and ensuring transparency spread across every division. Yet, underneath that calm exterior, a quiet unease began to grow. Then the cracks began to show. A sudden audit from the internal compliance department arrived, ordered by someone higher up, though no one could say who. They demanded files, financial statements, personal correspondence, all related to the reforms Jordan had implemented. The reasoning was vague, a review to ensure proper procedures were followed. He'd seen this before. It was the oldest corporate trick in the book: weaponize bureaucracy to slow progress and create doubt. The whispers started almost immediately. Some executives murmured about mismanagement. Others hinted that Jordan had been too aggressive in pushing change. HR meetings were postponed. Memos were rewritten. Allies turned cautious, afraid to be seen supporting him openly. It was as if the walls were closing in. Jordan stayed composed, but inside, the memory of Walker's betrayal resurfaced. The humiliation, the manipulation, the way one man's prejudice had almost destroyed him. It all came flooding back. Only this time, the enemy wasn't one person. It was a system fighting back. One morning, a front-page article hit the business news. A leaked report, filled with half-truths and omissions, accused Jordan of favoritism in hiring and using diversity for personal branding. The tone was venomous, carefully written to undermine his credibility without any solid proof. The headline screamed controversy, and overnight, social media exploded. Comments flooded in, some supportive, others cruel. The same people who had once praised his leadership now called him diversity tyrant, an activist in a suit, a man playing victim politics. It was a digital trial without evidence, and everyone wanted a piece of it. But what hurt most wasn't the lies. It was recognizing the fingerprints behind them. He knew who had done this: Richard Grant's allies. The old guard executives who had benefited from decades of unchecked bias had regrouped. Grant might have been gone, but his influence lingered. They wanted revenge. And this time they were coming for Jordan's career. The board demanded an emergency meeting. Jordan walked in knowing the stakes. One wrong word, and everything he had built could vanish. The same faces that once smiled at him now looked at him with suspicion, their loyalty shifting like sand. He presented his defense with calm precision, laying out every fact, every documented step of his reforms. He exposed how the article twisted data, how anonymous sources were former employees under Grant's regime. Slowly, the tide began to turn, logic cutting through lies. But then came the final blow. An executive, one of Grant's closest allies, slid a file across the table. An email thread suggesting Jordan had misused company funds to support personal initiatives. The room fell silent. Jordan froze, scanning the document. It was a forgery, expertly crafted, but he could tell. The language, the timestamps, subtle inconsistencies that only someone with his eye for detail would catch. Someone was framing him. For the first time in years, Jordan felt that old helplessness creep in, that sense of being trapped in a system that could destroy him no matter how clean his record was. He could fight it, yes, but the damage to his reputation might already be irreversible. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, lights off, the city humming outside. He thought of his journey. The rain-soaked day he'd been fired, the climb back up, the people he'd tried to protect. He thought of his mother's voice, soft and steady, reminding him that integrity always outlasts deception. He couldn't let them win. Not like this. So he began to dig. Quietly, methodically, he traced digital trails, timestamps, internal messaging. With help from a trusted IT analyst, one of the few who still believed in him, he began uncovering a hidden network of communications between certain board members and Grant's old partners. They had orchestrated the leak, fabricated the emails, and planted evidence to discredit him. It was corporate sabotage at its finest, clean, professional, and devastating. When the proof was finally compiled, Jordan faced a choice: expose them publicly and risk taking the company down with them, or use the information strategically to root out the rot from within. He chose the latter. The next board meeting was unlike any other. Jordan walked in calm, collected, holding a single folder. He didn't shout or accuse. He simply placed the evidence on the table and watched as faces turned pale. Emails, payment records, and server logs. Undeniable proof of conspiracy. Silence filled the room. One by one, those involved resigned or were terminated. The same executives who had plotted to destroy him were escorted out by security, just as he had once been. The irony wasn't lost on him. But even as he stood victorious, Jordan didn't celebrate. He felt the weight of the cycle, the endless struggle between progress and power, truth and manipulation. He had survived again, but he knew this wasn't over. Power had shown its true face, and it wasn't racist words or overt hate anymore. It was quiet, polished, and strategic. It hid behind policies, behind PR statements, behind handshakes that meant nothing. As he left the meeting room, the board chair, one of the few still loyal, stopped him. Her voice was low, almost cautious. "There's something you should know," she said. "Grant's not done. He's building something new." Jordan paused. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "A new firm. Private. Funded by the same people you just exposed. And they're coming for you? Personally this time." For a long moment, Jordan said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, a storm gathering again. He looked out the window, jaw tightening. He had spent years fighting systems, surviving betrayals, proving his worth over and over again. But this time, the battlefield would be different. This time, it wouldn't be corporate politics. It would be war. The storm that followed was unlike anything Jordan had ever faced. For years, he had fought quietly, through policy, professionalism, and integrity. But this time, his enemies weren't hiding behind titles or boardrooms. They were out in the open, weaponizing the full force of influence, money, and power to destroy him. Richard Grant's new firm emerged like a shadow. A private consulting network with deep corporate connections and a simple mission: to take control of the market Jordan had helped build. Their marketing was subtle, their methods ruthless. They spread whispers to investors, undermined partnerships, and leaked confidential information that painted Jordan's leadership as unstable. At first, it was just rumors, easy to dismiss. But then came the contracts being quietly withdrawn, the investors pulling out, the unexpected. Technical failures in his department's data systems. His projects began to crumble from within. He wasn't paranoid. He had proof. Traces of cyber attacks, coordinated media campaigns, and anonymous leaks tied back to Grant's network. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was an organized takedown. Jordan fought back the only way he knew how, with transparency. He called emergency meetings, released full reports of his division's financials, and invited third-party auditors to verify his work. It was bold, almost reckless, but it worked for a moment. The truth held the wolves at bay. But behind the scenes, the pressure was suffocating. The sleepless nights returned, the constant worry that one false headline could undo everything he'd built. Old doubts crept back in, the same ones that haunted him after Walker fired him years ago. Only this time, the stakes were much higher. One morning, he received a call from an old colleague, someone still loyal but fearful. She spoke in whispers, her voice trembling. "They're planning to blame you for the upcoming financial crash," she said. "They've been manipulating the numbers. If it goes public, it'll look like you caused it." Jordan's heart sank. It was a familiar pattern, scapegoating, the oldest tactic in the corporate playbook. Grant was orchestrating chaos from the outside, creating problems that would be pinned squarely on Jordan. Days later, the market dropped. A sudden, unexplained financial loss hit one of the subsidiaries under Jordan's oversight. The media pounced. Headlines screamed, "Scandal in diversity-driven division. Mismanagement exposed." It didn't matter that he wasn't responsible. In the court of public opinion, perception was everything. The board demanded answers. Meetings turned hostile. People he once trusted began distancing themselves. Investors threatened to pull funding. The company's image, the very one he had worked to cleanse of corruption and bias, was now being used as evidence against him. And then, like a cruel echo of the past, came the final meeting. They called it a review session. But Jordan knew what it was. The same kind of meeting Walker had used years ago to fire him. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he sat before the board, the chairman, once an ally, spoke with measured coldness. "This has become too damaging. We need someone the media trusts. You've done great work, but it's time for new leadership." The words hit hard. Even when you played by every rule, the system always found a way to discard you. Jordan signed the papers quietly. No fight, no argument, no breakdown. He'd learned that sometimes silence was the loudest response. When he left the building that day, it wasn't raining like before. The sky was clear, the air heavy with sunlight. He carried no box, no bitterness, only the weight of déjà vu. But this time, he wasn't broken. He was aware. He knew now that the system couldn't be reformed from within, not fully. Power protected itself too well. Real change would require something bigger, something beyond policies and speeches. In the weeks that followed, Jordan disappeared from the public eye. The media moved on, as it always did, chasing newer scandals. Grant's firm continued to rise, its influence spreading. But what no one knew was that Jordan had been building something quietly in the background. A network of his own. The people who had once suffered under Walker, under Grant, under countless faceless managers, they reached out to him. Former employees, whistleblowers, community leaders, small business owners, people who had lived through discrimination and refused to give up. Together, they began creating a movement. Not a company, not a charity, but a coalition. A platform dedicated to exposing corporate racism and systemic injustice using data, transparency, and the voices of those who had been silenced. The mission wasn't revenge. It was truth. Months later, Jordan stood before a crowd of reporters and activists as he launched the initiative publicly. The response was immediate. Global coverage, viral headlines, messages of support from those who had long felt unseen. Grant tried to discredit it, of course. He called it performative and politically motivated. But the difference now was clear. Jordan wasn't playing their game anymore. He had built his own. One night, as he sat in his modest home office, surrounded by emails from people thanking him for giving them a voice, Jordan reflected on how far he'd come. He thought of Walker, the man who had fired him, Grant, the man who tried to destroy him, and all the others who had doubted him. He realized something profound. Every injustice he had suffered had become part of his foundation. Every wound had turned into wisdom. And yet, even as he found peace, a new message appeared in his inbox. No name, no address, just a simple sentence. You've changed the game, Jordan, but are you ready for what comes next? He stared at the screen, heart steady. He knew what it meant. Change always had enemies. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't a survivor. He was a force. And this story, his story, wasn't over yet. Months passed. The movement Jordan had founded grew faster than anyone predicted. What began as a grassroots coalition of marginalized professionals evolved into a global force, one that corporations could no longer ignore. His platform, the Equity Network, became a household name known for holding major companies accountable for discrimination, harassment, and toxic cultures. He had gone from being a target of systemic prejudice to becoming one of its loudest and most respected challengers. But with that power came exposure and danger. Every week, his team received threats, anonymous letters, phone calls, online attacks. Trolls flooded social media, calling him a race baiter, troublemaker, and fake activist. It was nothing he hadn't heard before, but now it came from thousands instead of dozens. Still, Jordan didn't waver. He had learned that silence was the true enemy of justice, so he spoke louder. His speeches drew massive audiences. He appeared on panels, news outlets, and podcasts. He wasn't just talking about his own pain anymore. He was telling the stories of others who had been silenced, fired, or broken by the same structures he once believed in. And then, one day, an unexpected name resurfaced. Edward Walker, the man who had fired him all those years ago, the man who started it all. Jordan learned that Walker had fallen hard after his termination. He had bounced from job to job, never staying long. Eventually, he vanished from the corporate world altogether. Rumor had it he'd lost everything: his home, his marriage, his reputation. So when an email appeared in Jordan's inbox with the subject line, "Request for help," he almost deleted it. But something stopped him. He opened it. It was from Walker. The message was humble, apologetic. He had seen what Jordan had become: the interviews, the movement, the change. He admitted that he had treated Jordan unfairly, that his prejudice had cost him more than just a job. He wrote that he was living out of a small apartment now, struggling to find work, and he asked, not for money, not for a job, but for forgiveness. For a long time, Jordan stared at the screen. The emotions were complex: anger, sadness, vindication, compassion, forgiveness. The very thing he had wrestled with for years. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he thought back to that day in the rain, standing outside with a cardboard box, feeling worthless. He thought about how much that moment had shaped him, how every ounce of pain had become fuel for his journey. Maybe this was what full circle looked like. A week later, Jordan arranged a meeting, not in a boardroom, not in a corporate tower, but in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Walker arrived looking smaller than Jordan remembered. The sharp suit was gone, replaced by a worn jacket. His once proud posture was hunched, his eyes tired. Time had humbled him. Jordan didn't need to hear excuses. He could see the truth in Walker's expression. The weight of guilt, the recognition of karma. Life had already delivered the lesson. They sat in silence for a while before Jordan finally spoke. He told Walker that he forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because holding on to bitterness would only poison his own peace. He said that Walker's cruelty had once broken him, but it had also awakened him. Without that injustice, he might never have become who he was. Walker's eyes filled with tears. He thanked Jordan, voice trembling, and promised to spend the rest of his life trying to make amends, not to Jordan, but to others he had wronged. When they parted, there were no handshakes, no dramatic goodbyes, just quiet understanding. As Jordan walked away, the sun broke through the clouds. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. But fate wasn't done writing his story. 2 months later, the Equity Network was invited to partner with the government on a national initiative, a program to combat workplace discrimination and promote fair hiring practices across the country. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. On the day of the official signing, Jordan stood before a crowd of journalists, leaders, and employees from across industries. Cameras flashed, microphones buzzed, and for a brief moment, he felt the full weight of his journey. The pain, the humiliation, the long nights, the lonely battles. He spoke without notes, his voice steady and resolute. He told the story of the young man who once believed hard work alone could break barriers, and how he learned that it takes courage, not just effort, to demand justice. He reminded everyone that racism wasn't always loud or visible, that sometimes it lived in quiet decisions, subtle exclusions, and unspoken biases. And then he said something that silenced the room. Power doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've always been. I lost everything once because of prejudice. Today, I stand here not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as proof that integrity can outlast injustice. The applause was thunderous. Cameras captured the moment, and within hours it went viral. Millions watched, shared, and commented. For countless people around the world, Jordan became a symbol, not just of revenge or success, but of redemption. Later that night, back in his office, he looked out over the city. The same skyline he had once stared at through the fog of defeat. Now it shimmered with possibility. On his desk sat 2 objects, the photo of his mother and the company badge from the job where Walker had fired him. He kept it as a reminder, not of pain, but a transformation. He smiled softly, whispering words she once told him. The world won't always be fair, but you can be. As he turned off the lights, a single thought lingered in his mind. The realization that life had come full circle. He had been fired by a racist manager. He had become the man who changed the system that allowed men like that to thrive. And in doing so, he had discovered the greatest revenge of all, becoming everything they said he could never be.